Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Gwei Refuel, where I recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, and today's the 26th of July, 2022. Alright everyone, let's get into it. So apologies to the podcast listeners yesterday. Unfortunately, the service that I used to upload the podcast, Libsyn, was having some issues, and then I had to go to bed, so I didn't upload the podcast until about, 11 or 12 hours after it was supposed to go out, but it was up on YouTube, and I did make an announcement in the Discord channel saying that it wouldn't be up until later. But yeah, sorry about that to podcast listeners. Obviously, it's up now, so if you haven't listened to it yet and you missed it, you can go listen to it there. But anyway, on to the news from the last 24 hours. So Vitalik actually replied to this tweet here that Argent put out. So Argent put out this tweet thread about kind of like ETHCC and Vitalik's talk and things like that, and then focused on this roadmap that Vitalik, showcased at ETHCC, and something that he's posted on Twitter before. And we all know it as like the merge, the surge, the verge, the purge, and the splurge, right? Like these kind of like meme names that we've become accustomed to over the last few weeks and few months. Now, Vitalik replied to this and said, all these things are not stages. They are all happening in parallel. So if you're looking at this roadmap thinking, okay, well, we'll do the merge, then we'll do the surge, then we'll do the verge, and et cetera, et cetera. It's not like that. Like all of the kind of like research and development is happening in parallel. The thing is, though, is that, obviously depending on kind of like priorities and depending on what stage kind of the research and development is at, things will go into the network. Certain things will go into the network before other things. So, for example, the surge with proto-dank sharding is going to go in before Verkle tries, or is going to go in before kind of like historical data and technical kind of like upgrades and deleting the history and things like that, right? So while they are being worked on in parallel, they're not going to be deployed in parallel. They're going to be deployed probably all their standalone forks over the next few years. We don't know the kind of exact timelines here, obviously. But I guess with the merge, we know the timeline should be in less than 2 months now. And then with the surge, which is the kind of proto-dank sharding, we're hopefully expecting the first half of next year, but it could push later. But for the others, there's no real timeline. But that doesn't mean that we're kind of like waiting until the surge is kind of like implemented to begin research on the Verge and Verkle trees. No, and statelessness and things like that. No, they've been in active research for a very long time, and kind of like the same goes for pretty much everything on this list. And you can actually see, I don't think these are up to date, but you can see kind of like these progress bars on each of these things on the roadmap here. Now, as I said, I don't think they're up to date. We're further along on some of these things than we were when Vitalik first posted this, but essentially you can see that pretty much like everything down to the splurge has a progress bar. And kind of like the progress bar has kind of like progressed some amount. So that's why Vitalik was saying, these are being done in parallel. It's not a stages thing. Because if it was being done in stages, it would basically show that the Verge, the Purge, and the Splurge, there shouldn't be any progress at all, right? It should just be zero. But that is obviously not the case. So I just wanted to kind of like clear that up for people, because I see some people will be confused about this, and I think it's a pretty bad misconception to have, because of the fact that you may think, oh my god, it's going to take so much longer to get these things out there because they're not being worked on at the same time as these other things. When in reality, even things like the splurge, which is, I guess, like last on this list, on quote unquote last on this list, and it will probably be the kind of, I guess, last things that go in terms of kind of like a deployment thing, have been researched for as long as pretty much everything else on this list. So yeah, as I said, they're being worked on in parallel. I thank Vitalik for kind of like clarifying this for people, because whenever he tweets, obviously it gets him a lot more eyeballs on it than myself or some other people in the ecosystem tweeting it out. And yeah, it gives me a chance to highlight it on the refuel for you guys. So just wanted to kind of highlight that. You can check out this roadmap, by the way. Again, like don't worry about the progress bars on this. It doesn't really matter. But each of these items, like if you want to dig deeper into each of them, you can just Google them and you'll spend a long time on this. Like if you are literally at the point where you're like, okay, I want to learn as much as I can about the Ethereum roadmap as possible, and you have the time to do it, well, this will take you months and months and months to learn. Like if you really want to learn in terms of kind of like getting into the weeds, learning why each things are the way they are, what the current research is like, what the current development is like, all the kind of stuff behind it, it'll probably take you a few months to kind of get a grasp of all of it and across everything here, and understand it on a deeper level. Like obviously you can get the high level kind of like view on things, but if you want the extra context, if you want the reasoning as to why things are being done that way, then it's going to take a while. And this is actually funny, because this is a thought that I often have, and I kind of like talk about this with friends sometimes. This is the main reason, I think, why new people that come into this ecosystem don't understand why Ethereum is the way it is. Because to a new person, coming in, right? They see Ethereum and they see something like Solana, for example. Ethereum layer 1, not and maybe even rollups as an extension, right? But Ethereum layer 1, expensive to use. Like, it's expensive to use in terms of it costs a few dollars to do a swap, even at the cheap gas prices. Then you go on something like a Solana, and to do a decentralized exchange swap, it would cost like basically nothing, right? Now, obviously, Refuel watchers and listeners will know that there's a whole host of reasons why this is the case and why Ethereum is the way it is. But to a new person, they don't realize this. And how are they going to realize this? Like, how are they going to realize any of that? Like, and that's the thing. They're never, like, most of them are never going to. Most of them are never going to care. So what ends up happening is that it falls to us. It falls to the builders to build better products and build better services. And that's why we've obviously gone with the rollup-centric roadmap, because we think rollups will be able to outscale pretty much everything. Even the most centralized layer 1 out there, rollups will be able to outscale that over the longer term. And that is what users will care about at the end of the day. Like, I really do think that users do care about decentralization and security, but it's not something that they will think or care about on day one. They'll care about it kind of like when something goes wrong, especially, but as they learn more and more about certain things, and they kind of like care more and more about security, then obviously they'll kind of like, I guess, like have some common sense around this. So for example, right, in the current system, people put money in a bank. Like, most people aren't going to put money into a bank that maybe they've never heard of before, or doesn't look legit, or kind of like looks a little bit dodgy, right? They're going to go for the more trusted brands, and that's why banks are pretty centralized. Like, there's only a handful of them that actually last long term. So if you take that as kind of like the analogy there, I think the same is going to be true for crypto, because it's a value network where people aren't just going to put their money on anything. Like, especially as they keep hearing stories about exchanges being hacked and DeFi protocols being hacked and all that sorts of stuff. Like, as that goes on and as time goes on, and as I guess we saturate the mass market with crypto stuff, and I'm talking, this is like the decades view here, then I think more and more people will care. But yeah, just that's something I always think about. Like, if I was a total noob into this ecosystem, if I had no prior context, then how would I be able to differentiate between Ethereum and Solana? Just as an example, right? I wouldn't. I'd have to dive deeper into things. But that, in my mind, doesn't really stop Ethereum from still being the kind of like top ecosystem, still being the market leader, and rollups kind of adding to that, because of the fact that I believe rollups will offer just a better experience for developers to build on. They'll build their applications, and then those applications will offer a better experience to users. And as I said, I expect rollup fees to basically trend towards zero for the end user eventually. I don't expect the winning rollups to be charging gas fees to end user. I expect them to be extracting them away, and that, you know, we're on that path to get there through this roadmap. So yeah, just a bit of added context there from me, but I'm sure you guys have run into this before as well. All right, so next up here, we have a great thread from, speaking of scaling, from Shriram here from Eigenlayer. Now, I think this was called Data Layer before, and they changed their name, and I don't know if I'm saying Eigen right. It might be pronounced some other way. You guys know I'm terrible at pronunciation. But in this thread, he starts it off by saying, Ethereum Hyperscaling Primer. Why the best blockchains will have a no trade-off between scalability and security. Why is hyperscale data availability critical? How does Ethereum get there? Now, I highly recommend kind of reading through this thread. It's really, really great, and you'll get like a much better understanding of kind of like how Ethereum is scaling, and kind of like pretty much one of, if not the only viable path towards global scalability. Shriram kind of takes us on a journey in this thread, and he kind of like gets me pumped up, because he thinks, now I don't know if this is true or not, I don't know if this is being corroborated, I don't know if we're going to get there, but he thinks we can get to we can scale data availability from kind of like what it would be, I guess, with proto-dank sharding or with dank sharding 1,000,000 times more. So with proto-dank sharding, the data availability rate of Ethereum will go from 70 kilobytes a second to 1.3 megabytes per second, which is obviously a relatively huge jump there. But he thinks it's theoretically possible to use the same ideas that dank sharding uses to scale this data availability 1,000,000 times more to 1 terabytes per second. Now, if you want to know how that's possible, I suggest reading the thread, but do keep in mind that this stuff is still very theoretical. It has not obviously been done practically. I think with Eigenlayer, they're going to try and do this, and they're going to try and kind of like show that this works practically without sacrificing decentralization and security and all the good stuff that we care about. But if we can achieve that, like, I don't even know what to say. That would be more data availability than anyone would need for an extremely long time. We would be able to run anything on chain, anything and everything on a kind of on a roll up, which would be absolutely insane, right? When you think about it. But as I said, it's still theoretical. It's it's kind of like still very far away, even if it does work. I don't imagine something like this being implemented on the Ethereum network for a long time for a number of different reasons, but it is using the technologies that Ethereum is working on, that is part of the Ethereum roadmap. So that's why I wanted to highlight the thread and make sure that you read it. And there's also a video here as well if you want to read that. Watch that, because I think it's really, really great. And obviously, not everyone agrees with this. There are some kind of like debates happening here. Polygon said there are some trade-offs that may exist to this, such as higher complexity and historical storage becoming, I guess, kind of like untenable, but there are kind of like trade-offs might be fine, right? And he's kind of like written about this before in his blog post, which you can read here. But yeah, I think there's a few other comments in here as well, but I highly recommend reading the thread. I'll just link it in the YouTube description below for you. All right, so some more big Coinbase-related news here, which I find hilarious. But essentially, it came out yesterday that Coinbase is facing an SEC probe over cryptocurrency listings. This is not surprising to me at all. You guys know my opinion on what Coinbase has been doing over the last few years and the tokens they've been listing and just like the absolute crap they've been listing, which not only are securities, but they're like some of them are actually just outright scams. So this hasn't come as a surprise. Though I don't think the SEC really has much of a case here or much of a leg to stand on, because the SEC is the kind of institution that approved Coinbase's IPO. And as you guys know, Coinbase IPO'd in May of last year. So it wasn't exactly a kind of like thing that they did many years prior before they were doing all this stuff like listing all these tokens, right? So I don't think the SEC is really going to win anything here. Like they can't even win their case against Ripple. Like it looks like they're losing their case against Ripple. And XRP to me is a very clear security, but that's another topic. But it's just funny how I saw this and people were kind of like getting panicked about this and getting uproar about this. I'm like, guys, like, what are you talking about? Like, just because the SEC is probing Coinbase doesn't mean they're going to win anything. Doesn't mean they're going to win a settlement. Doesn't mean they're going to win a court case or anything like that, right? And if there is a settlement, that would probably be the best outcome, because that would mean that Coinbase just pays a fine and the SEC leaves them alone. This has happened before. This is in crypto, especially of for those of you who remember, Block One, the company that behind EOS, they raised, I think, like $4 billion or something in the EOS ICO, and that was an unregistered security sale. Guess how much they paid in a fine to the SEC to basically get the SEC off their back? $24 million out of the $4 billion that they raised. And they probably made more than that from selling the EOS tokens too. They paid $24 million. They admitted no wrongdoing, which I thought was hilarious. And no one in Block 1 went to jail or faced any kind of like personal liability from this, at least as far as I know. So the SEC is really a very toothless organization. Like the fact that you can just pay a $24 million fine using the proceeds from the unregistered security sale, right, and also pocketing a shit ton of profit from that is just hilarious to me. So even if Coinbase for some reason just wants the SEC off their back and basically says, okay, we'll pay this fine, just piss off, basically, right? That's hilarious. Like the SEC is not protecting anyone in that case. All they're doing is making themselves fatter, right? Probably some of the SEC higher ups are getting a bonus for this because they can kind of like show that they're doing their job, or quote unquote doing their job, right? But in reality, I think the SEC is one of the biggest jokes of an institution in the US. I think that they're not respected by anyone, not even by their peer organizations. And I think that this probe is really just them trying to look like they're doing something when in reality they're not. They're not. And they're not protecting anyone. Like I can't think of anyone that the SEC has protected, to be honest. Like, did they protect anyone from the Terra collapse? No, not at all. Have they gone after Terra? I mean, I'm sure the Korean authorities are doing a lot, but I haven't heard much out of the US about this. They did kind of like subpoena, I think, Do Kwon back in the day, but nothing really came of that, right? So, like, this is what I mean by toothless organization. Like, Terra was allowed to exist. And look, don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating for kind of like these regulatory agencies coming down hard on things or kind of like over-regulating stuff. But if their goal is to protect investors, then they're doing a really, really shit job of it. Like, if this was a private company, Gensler, the current head of the SEC, would have been fired a long time ago, like as if he was the CEO or something, right, of a company, because he's not actually doing anything. He's not doing what he's supposed to be doing. Or maybe he is. Maybe the real goal isn't actually to protect investors, which if you're on the kind of more cynical side of things, you don't believe that's the real goal. Maybe the real goal is just to be a bully and kind of make sure that the rich can stay rich and make sure that none of the smaller players can kind of like get out from under it. None of the retail investors, none of the plebs can get out from under it, right? I think there's merit to that. I don't think that's something that it's a conspiracy theory. I think a lot of the existing financial system is geared towards punishing retail investors and rewarding the already rich. And maybe the SEC just exists to protect that. Like, I don't know for sure, but everything that I've seen out of them, I haven't been impressed at all. And I'm not just saying that because I'm not a fan of financial regulators. Like, if the SEC was actually doing a good job and actually going after the scammers, actually going after the ecosystems that were extracting money and making people lose money, then I would applaud them. But they're not doing any of that. They're really not doing anything to protect anyone, which is just bizarre and insane. But it is kind of like the way it is. And obviously we've kind of like seen this on crypto Twitter for a long time now. I'm not the only one with this opinion, but I'll kind of leave that at that because I don't want to rant too much about it. But I think it's an important thing to consider that, like, these institutions do not exist to protect you. They exist to protect the establishment most of the time, if not all of the time. So whenever you see them going after Coinbase for kind of registering maybe unregistered securities and stuff like that, I don't expect much to come of this at all, and don't expect, anyone to go to jail or any kind of like things to happen to make these kind of like people lose money. I'm sure the people who kind of did these scam tokens already cashed out during the bull market and are off somewhere else, and they're not even being charged in this sort of stuff. They're just charging Coinbase. So yeah, anyway, I'm going to end that little rant there for now. There's a bunch of other things to get through, but I think it's just worth keeping in mind there. All right, so it seems we're getting very close to Arbitrum Nitro. So the Arbitrum developers Twitter account here announced yesterday that we are getting quite close to the Arbitrum 1 upgrade to the Nitro tech stack. A list of scheduled dates of our current plans for testnet upgrades prior to upgrading on mainnet can be found below. So they're going to be upgrading their testnets in the next couple days, and then they've said that mainnet will follow 2 weeks after. So you can see here that the girly Nitro devnet will be updated on July 26th, and the Nitro testnet will be updated on July 27th. So if we kind of like say that there's a couple weeks after, and then Ring could be on July 28th, and then we say a couple weeks after that, Nitro will be live on mainnet, we can pretty much put it in basically mid-August that Nitro will be live on the Arbitrum mainnet deployment, which is super exciting. Obviously, they had to pause the Odyssey kind of event because the chain got clogged because Nitro wasn't implemented. But from everything that I've seen from Nitro, it seems that this is going to be a massive boost in scalability for the Arbitrum network. Fees are going to be cheaper, and then I'm sure they're going to restart Odyssey, and people will be able to get back on there and start using Arbitrum in all its glory again, which I'm super excited for, of course. So very much looking forward to Nitro hitting mainnet here, and great to see that kind of like it's coming sooner rather than later. I did say to you guys, I think maybe the last week or the week before, that I felt like Nitro was coming, pretty soon. Like, I didn't think that they would kind of, pause Odyssey and basically wait 6 months to release Nitro or anything like that. And I did go back and see that they only, I think it was like either April, May, or June when they kind of first put Nitro on testnet. So it hasn't actually been that long. And the fact that we pretty much, hopefully we'll get a mainnet in mid-August is kind of like really, really bullish for me anyway, in terms of kind of like Arbitrum development. So very much looking forward to that. You can keep an eye out for it, and I'll definitely cover it on the Refuel once it's live. All right, so I talk a lot about Polygon's business development on the Refuel, and I don't want to kind of rehash everything that I've said before, but there was a great tweet here from Crypto Texan today that basically showcased all the major partnerships, or not all of them, but a lot of the major partnerships that Polygon has kind of landed over the last maybe 6 to 9 months, I guess you could say here, and it's kind of like in descending order. So you got like DraftKings, which was announced in October of last year. You got other big organizations like Adobe, Stripe, Meta, Reddit, Disney, which brings us to July of this year. But I think this really does speak to obviously their business development skills, because these kind of partnerships are not things that just anyone can land. And as I've said before, Polygon is competing with other very well-funded ecosystems, typically layer 1 ecosystems, to do this. And then Crypto Texan also makes the kind of like note here that they've done this while launching the Polygon ZK EVM, right? While working on all this kind of like ZK technology and all this layer 2 stuff and all their other products, right? Which is just crazy to me. Polygon is such a powerhouse, and the funny thing about Polygon is that they were Matic Network, right? They were still Matic Network in only a couple of years ago or something like that, I think, if I'm remembering correctly here. And then obviously they became Polygon, and then from there they have just exploded in both usage, in awareness, in kind of like the products that they're building, and it's just great to see like they've come so far and they've been rewarded for it. Like, I know, like, obviously I'm an advisor to Polygon, and you guys know that, but when I became an advisor of Polygon, I actually signed it when it was signed the agreement when it was still Matic Network. And Matic Network back then, for those who remember, wasn't really something people talked about. It wasn't viewed favorably. No one really knew what they were doing. And the token was not really worth anything back then. I mean, I believe when I signed on, it was either worth 1 or 2 cents or something like that. And it's worth much more than that today. I think it's worth like 75 cents or something, and went higher than that in the bull market. So, I kind of like didn't join Polygon because they were doing this and because I wanted to be part of kind of like this. I joined them because I believed, or as an advisor, because I believed in their vision. I believed that they had the chops to kind of like pull this off, and they did. And honestly, I'm blown away by it myself. Like, I didn't kind of like think that they would go this far. I thought that they were going to be a powerhouse, but they've just blown away my expectations here. I think they've kind of like blown away everyone's expectations, really. People doubted them even up until recently about their zkVM tech, and some people will say, oh, they had to acquire these teams to do zkVM. Guys, like, I don't think these people realize how many people there are actually able to build zero-knowledge technology, let alone zkVMs. They're pretty much all accounted for already. Like, there are no more of these people. They don't exist as part of kind of like some team that no one's ever heard of. It's either Polygon, Starkware, zkSync, and a few other kind of like, and Scroll, I should say, and maybe some kind of like stragglers here and there, but pretty much all of them are already accounted for. There's very, very few people who can do this. So if Polygon wanted, instead of acquiring teams, what they would have to do is they would have to go and recruit people themselves. They would have to compete with these other ecosystems for personnel. When in reality, acquiring these teams, bringing them all in-house and letting them just continue the work that they've been doing and giving the resources for them to do that was the right approach here. So yeah, anyway, I'm going to stop fawning over Polygon here. I don't know. Whenever I think about it, guys, it's just absolutely blown me away how well they've done with not just the partnerships, not just the business development, but like everything since I kind of like signed on as an advisor. It's just, it's been great to see. It's been great to see their ascent, and they're adding so much value to the Ethereum ecosystem. It's insane. All right, on to this tweet thread from OP Labs today. So this is a bit of a technical deep dive into something that Optimism does. So you can kind of read the thread, but I'll kind of read the start here where they said, Optimism does a lot of stuff on chain. Managing all of these interactions securely can be a bit of a headache. That's why we built Drippie, a trust minimized Ethereum native conditional transaction system. As I said, bit technical here. Not a long thread. You can also kind of, I guess, read this blog post titled Drippie, How Optimism Automates Ethereum. If you're into any of that stuff, if you're into kind of like development and learning more about development, you should definitely give this thread and blog post a read. But for the TLDR here of what Drippie is, it's like a Web3 version of If This Then That. If you've ever used this app, If This Then That, or IFTTT, it basically allows transactions to be executed under certain conditions. So Drippie allows us being Optimism, to easily program in Solidity sets of checks, actions that we call drips. Really cool. I think that people don't realize that this sort of stuff is needed and this sort of stuff is happening in the background for a lot of projects out there. Something as a, I guess, simple example here is Oracle updates. Whenever an Oracle update is published on chain from something like Chainlink, that is all handled off-chain first, and then there is an off-chain kind of like mechanism, a script that runs to post that data on-chain so that the price can kind of like go on-chain and DeFi apps can use it and other people can use it, and we can all see that there's a price there and we can all validate and things like that, right? So Drippie, I guess, is basically like an extension on that and basically kind of like tool that allows automation for anything at the end of the day. Like any of these kind of interactions, anything that needs to be done on networks, on smart contracts, is what Drippie does. But as I said, there is a thread and a blog post for you to read to jump into this deeper here. Definitely maybe only do so if you're kind of like a developer or if you want some more context around this. But it's not too complicated to understand, but it may not be useful to you if you're just if you're a non-developer. All right, so a great tweet here from Raul today where he said, today, companies pay for their own cloud costs to provide services and great UX to paying customers. With extremely cheap fees from rollups post-sharding on Ethereum, companies abstracting gas fees away from users to offer them value will become a normal thing again. This is what I was talking about before, about how, and I've talked about this a lot on the Refuel, right? About how rollups eventually will be subsidizing all the costs for their users because the cost will be so low. And as an example of this is Immutable X. They're not technically a rollup, they're a Validium, and because of that, the transaction fees are extremely cheap because they store the data off-chain. They cover the cost for their users because it's so cheap to do so. And it gives their users an absolutely amazing experience of not having to pay any gas fees to do anything on the network, right? They can still use ETH in order to kind of like use it as money, to trade NFTs and stuff like that, but they don't have to worry about gas fees. They never even have to think about it. The same is going to be true for things like Optimism and Arbitrum and the Polygons and the Starkways and the Scrolls and everything like that. Once they get cheap enough with dank sharding, with more data availability, once they do their own upgrades, once they get to a point where it's literally cents on the dollar, even less than that, there are going to be a subsidization of most, if not all, of kind of like those fees in certain different ways, right? It's not just going to be kind of like the Optimism Foundation paying the fees, for example. It will be, I think, the validators kind of like paying them because they'll be making money from other kind of like avenues such as MEV, for example, or the applications themselves will be making money from the fees that they take, and then they'll kind of like subsidize that for their users, all these sorts of stuff, right? Like when you think about how we can take this and where we can take this and how much of a boon this would be to user experience, it gets really wild. So, I mean, we're already there in terms of Immutable X obviously being already there in terms of kind of like layer 2s. We're not there with rollups yet because they're too expensive, but with Validiums, it's very easy to do because it's already very cheap. And that gives us insight into, I think, what we're going to be seeing long-term with things like dank sharding implemented. All right, finally here we have an update from Alphaday. Now I covered these guys a few weeks ago, but the Alphaday beta is now live and you're invited to try it out. So if you're an Alphaday early Discord NFT holder, you can visit app.alphaday.com and use the following credentials in this thread to get started here. And now, for those of you who don't know, I described Alphaday as basically like a Bloomberg terminal for crypto, for Ethereum, and something that I am definitely very excited to use. I think I just saw this before. I'm going to go play around with it soon. I haven't played around with it yet, but I'm very, very excited to play around with this and see how it can kind of work with my current flow and potentially replace my current flow of keeping up with everything. I described it last time where I said that I have so many different windows in front of me to keep up with everything. You know, Twitter feed, newsletters, prices, kind of like my portfolio, stuff like that, right? And I think, you know, having kind of like one, I guess, display, one dashboard for that would be really, really cool, especially for the news stuff. Like obviously I cover the news on the Refuel, being able to grade it in a better way, being able to kind of like keep track of it in a better way at a glance would really be beneficial to me. So I'm really excited to kind of like test out this product. You should do so as well. And I should disclose I'm an investor in this product as well. I think I disclosed that last time, but just again, people who didn't hear me say that last time, but it is in beta and you kind of like can try it out here. I'll link in the YouTube description below. I have a couple minutes left here. Just another thing that I wanted to talk about today, just before I finish up here. It's not related to the markets, but it kind of is. I find it funny how whenever I kind of like look at people discussing price and discussing kind of like the markets in general, there's always this inkling of, oh, this week's going to be bad because of this, and this news event. And like for everyone who hasn't yet, you should go read a book titled Fooled by Randomness, which is a very popular book and it's been suggested in crypto circles a lot of times, but it is so accurate and describes this phenomenon so accurately. Because let's just take a recent example. Everyone was like super bearish, I think a few weeks ago when the CPI numbers came out because they were the highest in like 40 years. And then the price of ETH and BTC and a lot of other cryptos pumped, right? So like there are certain events that, well, I think most events that people point to and they're like, oh, this is going to affect the price this way. This is going to affect the price this way. Like it doesn't work like that. Like and this is what the book Fooled by Randomness goes into. It basically shows that like just because it's a coincidence sometimes that one of these events leads to this price action or one of these events leads to that price action doesn't mean it's a trend, doesn't mean it's a pattern. If it was that easy to trade markets just based on this news that everyone kind of like expects is going to be bad or everyone expects is going to be good, then everyone would be a good trader. It doesn't work like that at all. So I suggest reading that book. I think there's maybe kind of like some YouTube videos about it as well if you don't want to read the whole book there. But I just wanted to kind of note that because I see people talking about this a lot. I see people concerned about the macro environment a lot. Like I get it. Like it is concerning. There are obviously a lot of shitty things happening right now. And people kind of like are wondering, you know, should I buy now or should I wait? You know, especially people who kind of like are over-invested as well. Like, oh, crap, I'm already over-invested. I want to buy more, but if I have to wait a few years, maybe I won't be able to pay my bills, stuff like that. If you're in that position, not investment advice, but please don't put yourself in that position. Like, I'll try to get out of it because it's not a good way to be. But yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment on that, and I'm going to end it on that note. So thank you everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.